subscribe to Storylab. Now, let's begin this one. Darren Jacobs adjusted the wrench in his hand, the familiar weight of steel against his calloused palm, grounding him in the present. Beneath the chassis of a 1969 Mustang, oil-stained concrete pressed against his back as he worked the bolt loose. His garage, 2,000 square feet of organized precision, smelled of motor oil, welding fumes, and the pine cleaner he used every Friday. At 42, he'd built this life deliberately, a custom automotive restoration business that kept his hands busy and his mind occupied with problems that had solutions. Darren, Stella's voice carried across the workspace, heels clicking against the concrete he'd poured himself 3 years ago. I'm heading to the gallery. I'll be back late. He slid out from under the Mustang, grabbing a rag to wipe his hands. Stella stood in the doorway connecting the garage to their house, backlit by the afternoon sun. At 38, his wife maintained the same elegant posture she'd had when they met 13 years ago at a coffee shop in Portland. Dark hair pulled back, tailored black dress, silver jewelry that caught the light. She ran a small art gallery downtown. Imported pieces, high-end clientele, the kind of business that required networking and late nights. Another donor event? He asked, studying her face. Something flickered in her gray eyes, gone before he could name it. Russian Cultural Foundation. Big donors from Brighton Beach. She checked her phone. I'll probably stay at Janet's apartment downtown. You know how these things run. Janet Stewart, her business partner. Darren had met her twice. Sharp-featured woman with quick eyes and quicker exits from conversations. Drive safe, he said. Stella crossed to him, kissed his cheek, her perfume expensive and unfamiliar. You're a good man, Darren. Too good. The words carried a weight he didn't understand. Then she was gone, her BMW purring out of the driveway. Darren returned to the Mustang, but his focus had fractured. Too good. What did that mean? He'd been hearing similar comments from Stella for months now. Odd inflections, half-finished thoughts, phone calls taken in other rooms. He'd attributed it to stress from the gallery, to the natural drift that happened in marriages after a decade. But instinct, the kind honed through years of high-stakes operations in places he couldn't talk about, whispered otherwise. He'd met Stella in 2012, 6 months after he'd walked away from 12 years as a Delta Force operator. The decision to leave had been calculated. He'd survived operations in Fallujah, Helmand Province, the Syrian border. He'd been part of hostage rescue missions that never made the news and direct action raids that did. But by 30, he'd watched too many good men die, had killed too many enemies to count, and recognized the erosion happening inside him. So he'd taken his discharge, moved to Seattle, and buried that life so deep that even his wife didn't know existed. She thought he'd been a logistics coordinator for the Army. Boring, safe, the kind of job that didn't invite questions. He'd built his cover story carefully, mixing enough truth, the years, the deployments, the bases, with enough mundane detail to bore anyone who asked. And Stella had never pushed, never seemed interested in his past beyond what it meant for their present, which made the secrets he discovered 3 weeks ago all the more incomprehensible. It started with a phone call. He'd been in the garage office, ordering parts, when Stella's voice had risen through the ductwork, an architectural quirk he'd noted when designing the space but never thought to use. She'd been in the kitchen, speaking Russian. He didn't speak the language fluently, but 12 years in the field had given him enough to catch names, to understand tone. She'd said Victor 3 times, Brigade twice, and one phrase he knew too well, polish it dello Stellano. Get it done. Darren had spent the next week gathering information with the patients he'd learned stalking Taliban commanders through mountain passes. Stella's maiden name was Riddle, common enough, but her mother's maiden name was Volkov. Her uncle, Viktor Volkov, had emigrated from Moscow in 1998, changed his surname to Riddle, and built a legitimate import business in Brooklyn that barely concealed his real empire. A Bratva brigadier with connections to the Solntsevskaya Brotherhood. The NSA contact Darren still had from his Delta days. Wesley Austin, now running security consulting in D.C., had pulled the files. Victor Riddle commanded a brigade of 23 men, specialists in everything from extortion to contract killing. He'd expanded west over the past 5 years, laundering money through real estate and art galleries. Art galleries, like the one Stella ran. Darren had felt the first crack then, the fissure of understanding that his marriage had been built on lies layered over lies. But he'd maintained discipline, watched and waited, because a good operator never moved on incomplete intelligence. The garage had been his insurance policy long before he'd understood why he needed one. When they'd bought this property 4 years ago, an acre outside the city, isolated by trees and geography, he designed the garage with specifications that confused the contractor. Reinforced concrete walls, 16 inches thick. Steel cord door frames. Industrial ventilation with filtration. The contractor thought he was paranoid about theft or fire. In reality, Darren had been building a kill box, the kind he'd learned to construct in training facilities at Fort Bragg, just in case the past ever came looking for him. Now, working beneath the Mustang, he considered the possibility that he'd married the past without knowing it. His phone buzzed. A text from Oliver Tucker, his only employee, a 26-year-old with talent for engine work and a refreshing lack of curiosity about Darren's scars or silence. Boss, that Corvette transmission came in. Want me to swing by tomorrow morning? Take the day, Darren typed back. Family emergency. I'll call you Monday. Because tomorrow was Friday, and 3 weeks of surveillance had revealed a pattern. Every Friday, Stella went to the gallery early, came home for lunch, then returned downtown. And every Friday afternoon, she made a phone call from the kitchen, speaking Russian, her voice low and urgent. The lunch pattern had held today. She'd been home from 11 to 1, made her call at 12:30 while he was supposedly out picking up supplies. He'd actually been in the garage attic, another design feature, accessed through a hidden panel, listening through the ductwork as she spoke to Victor. This time he caught more words. Garage, tomorrow, Viber, choice, and then the phrase that had stopped his heart. On Inizneet. He doesn't know. She'd left for the gallery afterward, told him she'd be back late, maybe stay downtown, setting up her alibi. Darren slid out from under the Mustang and walked to the garage's far wall. He pressed a spot on the concrete, and a section popped open, one of 6 hidden compartments he'd built into the structure. Inside, a Glock 19, suppressor for loaded magazines, and a knife he'd carried through Ramadi. He checked the weapon, loaded it, and placed it in the workbench drawer within easy reach. Then he walked to the main garage door, the one large enough to drive trucks through, and examined the reinforced track system. From outside, it looked normal. From inside, he could see the secondary lock mechanisms, the steel bars that could drop into place, sealing the door as effectively as a bank vault. The side door had similar features. And the windows, those narrow strips near the ceiling, were ballistic glass mounted in steel frames. To anyone else, this was just a very secure garage. To someone with his training, it was a fortress with carefully designed fatal funnels. His phone rang. Wesley Austin. Talk to me, Darren said. Your wife made 3 calls today to Victor Riddle's known cell. Wesley's voice was flat, professional. They'd operated together in Iraq, had shared a Humvee through Fallujah's bloodiest month. Signal intelligence picked up Russian, but the keywords that got flagged were elimination, asset, and mourning. Darren, if this is what I think it is silence. Then, you need extraction? I can have a team there in 6 hours. Negative. Darren looked around his garage, at the space he'd built with his own hands. I'm exactly where I need to be. Jesus stare. You're going to. I'm going to handle it. He kept his voice level. But I need 2 things. First, can you have a cleanup crew on standby? The kind that handles sensitive situations. How sensitive? Brigade-sized. Another pause. You're serious. As the grave. Second thing. I need you to make a call to Mark Wilkins at FBI Organized Crime. Tell him there's going to be a major Bratva incident tomorrow morning in Seattle. Anonymous tip. Tell him to have a team ready to respond to my location, but not before 10 a.m. Can you do that? You're using yourself as bait. I'm using myself as a solution to a problem. Darren walked to his workbench, opened the laptop hidden in a drawer, and pulled up schematics he'd drawn 4 years ago. These men are coming here to kill me in my own garage. I'm just going to make sure the environment isn't what they're expecting. Wesley was quiet for a long moment. I'll make the calls. But Dare, don't go dark on me. I want confirmation by noon tomorrow that you're alive. You'll have it. Darren hung up and stared at the schematics. The garage's true blueprint, showing every trap, every redundancy, every measure he'd installed for a day he'd hoped would never come. But hope was for civilians. Operators dealt in preparation and execution. His marriage was over. That reality settled into his chest like a blade between ribs, cold and absolute. 13 years with a woman who'd been lying to him, using him, setting him up for execution. The pain would come later, he knew. Right now, he needed the clarity that came from accepting the truth. Stella had married him for a reason connected to her uncle's operations, and now that reason had expired. He thought back through their relationship, looking for the tells he'd missed. The way she'd pushed him to buy this property, specifically this isolated acre. The way she'd encouraged his quiet life, his small business, his distance from old military contacts. The way she'd asked, so casually, about his emergency funds, his accounts, his life insurance. She'd been profiling him, he realized, assessing his value, his vulnerabilities, his connections. And she concluded he was vulnerable now. Isolated. Easy to eliminate. Darren pulled up another file on his laptop. The surveillance footage from cameras he'd installed 6 months ago when his instincts started screaming. He watched Stella in their kitchen 3 weeks prior. Phone to her ear, her face cold as she spoke Russian to her uncle. This wasn't the woman he'd thought he married. This was someone else entirely. A Bratva plant who'd played a 13-year con. He wondered what the truth was. Had she ever loved him? Or had every moment been calculation? Had their wedding been genuine? Or just another operation? The questions threatened to pull him into darkness, so he pushed them aside. Right now, emotions were a liability. His phone buzzed again. A text from Stella, staying at Janet's tonight. Love you. The casual cruelty of those 2 words, love you, sent ice through his veins. She was telling him she loved him while coordinating his murder. Darren deleted the text without responding and pulled out a different phone, a burner he kept for emergencies. He had calls to make, preparations to finalize. Tomorrow morning, Victor Riddle's entire brigade would walk into this garage, expecting an easy kill. What they'd find instead was a demonstration of why Delta Force operators never truly retired. They just waited for the world to make the mistake of underestimating them. Darren stood, walked to the center of the garage, and looked up at the reinforced ceiling, the ventilation system, the carefully placed entry points. He'd built this place to protect himself. Tomorrow, it would serve a different purpose. It would become a tomb for every man who'd accepted money to end his life. And when it was done, when the last body hit the floor, Stella would understand the magnitude of her error. She'd married a ghost, a man whose past was soaked in blood and precision. She thought she knew him. She'd been wrong. The night air bit cold as Darren sat in his truck, parked 3 blocks from Stella's gallery. The burner phone pressed against his ear, connecting to a number he'd memorized but never called. It rang twice before a woman answered. Yes. Josephine, it's Darren Jacobs. I need to speak with Shane. Silence, then hold. Shane Valentine had been his team sergeant in Delta, a man who'd pulled him out of an ambush in Mosul and then bought him a beer like it was nothing. They'd kept in touch sporadically after Darren left. Birthday texts, annual Christmas cards, the kind of contact that maintained connection without inviting questions. Shane had retired 2 years after Darren, moved to Tacoma, and opened a private security consultancy that trained bodyguards and executive protection teams. Dare. Shane's voice was gravelly, touched with bourbon. It's almost midnight. This better be good. I need the kit, Darren said. Everything from the old days. And I need it delivered to my garage by 0600. The line went quiet. Shane knew what the kit meant, the equipment they'd used in the field, the tools that weren't available through normal channels. What kind of situation are we talking about? 23 hostiles, high threat, incoming to my location approximately 0900 tomorrow. I need to be ready. Jesus Christ. Shane exhaled hard. You want backup? I can have 4 guys there in. Negative. This is personal, and I need to handle it alone. But I need the equipment. Dare, if you're going up against that many. I built the terrain, Shane. I know every advantage, every angle. I just need the tools. Another pause. Your wife. Part of it. Goddamn. Shane was quiet for a beat, processing. All right, I'll have it there by 6. Everything, breaching charges, flashbangs, the good plate carrier, night vision if you need it. But Dare, you call me when it's done. I want confirmation. You'll get it. And if you don't make it, then Wesley Austin has instructions. Darren watched Stella's gallery through the windshield. Lights on in the second-floor office, shadows moving. But I'm going to make it. These men are walking into a prepared kill box. I'm just a triggerman. Shane laughed, dark and knowing. You always were the scariest operator I ever met. Quiet about it, but scary. All right, brother. 6 a.m. And Dare, make them pay. That's the plan. Darren hung up and continued watching the gallery. At 12:47 a.m., the lights went out. At 1:03, Stella emerged with Janet Stewart, both women laughing about something as they climbed into separate cars. Stella drove toward downtown, toward Janet's apartment, maintaining her alibi. Darren followed at a distance, confirming she actually went to the address. She did, parking in the garage, taking the elevator up. He waited 30 minutes, watching the windows. Lights on in the 8th floor corner unit. Shadows of 2 women moving around, settling in. So Stella was committed to her story. She'd spend the night in the city, probably fielding calls from Victor about the operation, maybe even celebrating in advance. She'd wake up tomorrow expecting news of her husband's death. Then she'd play the grieving widow, collect whatever payout Victor had promised, and move on with her life. Except none of that was going to happen. Darren drove back to his property, pulled into the garage, and began the final preparations. He worked methodically, checking each system, each trap, each contingency he'd built into the structure. The garage had been his masterpiece, a defensive position disguised as a workspace. Now it would become his proving ground. At 3 a.m., he took a break, made coffee, and sat in the office reviewing the intelligence Wesley had sent. Victor Riddle's brigade consisted of 23 men, all with military or criminal backgrounds. 6 had served in the Russian military, 3 in Spetsnaz. The rest were street soldiers who'd proven themselves in Brighton Beach's gang wars. They were competent, experienced, and completely unprepared for what he'd built. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. Victor would send his men to the garage under the pretense of a simple execution. Kill Darren Jacobs, dispose of the body, collect whatever valuables existed, and disappear. They'd expect a civilian, maybe someone with basic military training, but nothing they couldn't handle with overwhelming force. What they'd encounter instead was a carefully engineered slaughter. At 6 a.m., Shane Valentine arrived in an unmarked van, killed the engine, and climbed out carrying 2 large duffel bags. He looked the same as Darren remembered, 6'2", 220, built like someone who'd spent decades staying combat ready. His eyes scanned the property with professional assessment before settling on Darren. Hell of a place you've got, Shane said, handing over the bags. Remote, good sight lines, single access road. You've been planning for this. Not this specifically. Darren took the bags, felt their weight. But I've been planning. Shane glanced at the garage. Can I see the setup? They walked inside, and Darren showed him the layout. The reinforced walls, the kill zones, the entry points, the positions he'd prepared. Shane walked the space slowly, professionally, nodding at details only someone with their training would appreciate. You build a funnel, Shane said finally. They come through that main door. They're silhouetted against daylight with no cover. Side doors the same. Windows are too high for entry. And once they're inside, he looked at the sight lines, the positions, the overlapping fields of fire. They're in a bottle with nowhere to go. That's the idea. How many do you expect through the main door? Majority. Victor will send a scout first, maybe 2 men. They'll report back it's clear. Then the main force, maybe 15, 20 men. He'll keep a few outside as security. Shane nodded. And you're going to let them all come in. Every single one. Then I seal the doors and end it. Jesus. Shane looked at him with something between respect and concern. You've become something else, Dare. Something I'm not sure I recognize. They're coming to kill me in my home, Darren said quietly. They made this choice. I'm just responding appropriately. Your wife set this up? Yeah. That's cold. Shane gripped his shoulder. You going to handle her too? Not the same way. But she'll pay. Darren met his eyes. Everyone involved will pay. Shane studied him for a long moment, then nodded. All right. I've got to get back before Josephine wonders where I've been. But Dare, you remember the fundamentals. Control your breathing, pick your targets, move with purpose. You've got the skills, you've got the terrain. They don't stand a chance. I know. They walked back outside. Shane climbed in his van, paused before starting the engine. One more thing. When this is done, you're going to have to live with it. 23 men, no matter how justified, that's a heavy weight. You sure you want this? Darren thought about Stella's voice on the phone, cold and calculating, arranging his murder. He thought about Victor Riddle's men, professionals who killed for money, who'd accepted a contract on his life. He thought about the alternative, running, hiding, looking over his shoulder forever. I'm sure, he said. Shane nodded, started the van, and drove away. Darren watched until the taillights disappeared, then returned to the garage and opened the duffel bags. Inside, everything he needed. Body armor, flashbangs, breaching charges, extra ammunition, tactical gear he hadn't touched in years. He laid it out, checked each piece, felt the muscle memory return as he loaded magazines and tested equipment. At 7:30 a.m., his regular phone buzzed. Stella, calling from Janet's apartment. He let it go to voicemail, then listened to her message. Hey, honey, just wanted to say good morning. I'll probably be home around 2 or 3. Love you. 3 hours after the hit squad was scheduled to arrive. She planned her return carefully, giving Victor's men time to complete the job and clean up. She'd walk through the door, discover her husband missing, and call the police with manufactured panic. Except by 3 p.m., she'd be walking into a very different scene. Darren deleted the voicemail and prepared himself mentally for what was coming. He'd killed before, many times, but always as part of a unit, always with the sanction of authority, always in the context of war. This was different. This was personal. This was 23 men who'd chosen to murder him for money, and he was choosing to destroy them completely. Some might call it revenge. He called it justice. At 8:15 a.m., Wesley Austin sent a text. FBI team is briefed and on standby. They'll roll at your signal. Cleanup crew is also staged. You're green-lit for everything that's about to happen. Stay alive. Darren responded with a simple thumbs-up emoji, then turned off the phone. From this point forward, he was in operational mode, the mindset he'd learned to enter before every mission, a state of heightened awareness and calm lethality where emotions became data and violence became mathematics. He positioned himself in the garage's upper observation point, a small platform hidden in the rafters accessible only by ladder. From here, he had a perfect view of the entire space, with angles on every entrance. He loaded his primary weapon, a Daniel Defense M4 from Shane's kit, and set up his secondary weapons within reach. 2 Glocks, a shotgun, extra magazines, flashbangs, and a knife. Then he waited. At 8:47 a.m., he heard the first vehicle on his access road. The sound of multiple engines, heavy trucks, approaching with the confidence of men who expected no resistance. Darren controlled his breathing, slowed his heart rate, and watched through the garage's security camera feed on a tablet. 3 black SUVs pulled up to his property, parking in formation. Men emerged, 23 total, just as the intelligence predicted. They wore dark clothing, tactical gear, and carried weapons openly. Victor Riddle exited the lead vehicle, a man in his 60s with silver hair and the bearing of someone who'd commanded soldiers. He spoke to his men in Russian, gesturing toward the garage. 2 scouts approached the main door, weapons drawn. They tried the handle, unlocked, exactly as Darren had left it. They pushed inside, scanning the space with professional caution. The garage appeared empty except for the Mustang, the workbenches, the tools. One scout called back in Russian. Clear. Victor nodded, said something else, and the main force began moving forward. 15 men poured through the main door, spreading out, weapons ready. They expected an ambush, a fight, something. What they found was an apparently empty garage. That's when Darren triggered the first trap. The main door slammed down behind them, steel bars dropping into place with a thunderous clang. Simultaneously, the side door sealed. The men spun, shouting in Russian, realizing they were trapped. A few ran to the doors, trying to force them open, discovering quickly that they were sealed inside a reinforced concrete box. Victor stood outside, his face transforming from confidence to shock. He barked orders, and the remaining men outside began trying to breach the door, but it was designed to withstand explosive breaching charges. Inside, the trapped men were panicking now, searching for exits for their target, for anything. Darren watched from his perch, counting them. 15 inside, 8 outside with Victor. Exactly as predicted, he dropped a flashbang from his position. It detonated in the center of the garage, stunning everyone, destroying their night vision and disorienting them completely. Then he opened fire. The first 3 men dropped before they understood where the shots came from. The others scattered, trying to find cover, but Darren had designed the space specifically to eliminate cover. Every workbench, every vehicle, every potential shield had been positioned to create open firing lanes from his elevated position. He moved methodically, selecting targets with the precision that came from years of training. Headshots, center mass, double taps. Men fell, blood spraying across the concrete he'd poured with his own hands. Some returned fire, but they were shooting blind, their rounds sparking off the reinforced walls. The slaughter lasted 90 seconds. When it ended, 15 men lay dead or dying on the garage floor, and Darren hadn't sustained scratch. He reloaded, took a breath, and descended from his perch using a rope he'd positioned specifically for this purpose. Outside, Victor was screaming orders, his remaining men trying desperately to breach the doors. Darren walked to a control panel hidden in the wall and pressed a sequence of buttons. Vents opened in the ceiling, and a chemical smoke began flooding the garage, thick, white, obscuring. He pulled on a gas mask, another piece of kit Shane had provided, and moved to the side door. He unsealed it from the inside, just enough for it to appear compromised. Victor's men would see the smoke pouring out, assume something had gone wrong, and rush in to save their comrades. The tactic worked perfectly. 3 men burst through the side door into the smoke, and Darren killed them before they'd taken 3 steps. The smoke concealed his position, turned him into a ghost, a phantom that killed from nowhere. Victor's voice outside, furious now, ordering his men to regroup, to think, to... Darren triggered the main door's partial release. It rose 3 feet, just enough for men to duck under, and more Bratva soldiers came flooding in, desperate to reach their fallen comrades, to understand what was happening. They died in the smoke, cut down by precise fire from a man who could see them perfectly through thermal optics while they saw nothing but white haze. The tactical situation collapsed for the Bratva. What was supposed to be a simple execution had become a massacre, their men dying in a kill box designed by someone who understood warfare better than any of them. Victor was outside with only 2 men left, his brigade decimated in minutes. Darren moved to the office, accessed the external speakers he'd installed, and played Victor's voice, a recording from one of the phone calls Stella had made, where Victor had said in Russian, "Bring every man. Leave no witnesses." Victor's face through the security camera showed the moment he realized what had happened. His niece's husband wasn't a civilian. He was something else entirely, something that had just destroyed 21 of his best men in a garage designed specifically for this purpose. The 2 remaining soldiers broke, running for the vehicles. Darren stepped out the side door, rifle raised, and put them down before they'd made it 10 steps. Then he walked toward Victor, who stood frozen beside his SUV, his hand moving toward a weapon. "Don't," Darren said quietly. "Put your hands on the hood." Victor complied, his face gray with shock. "Who are you?" "Someone your niece made the mistake of underestimating." Darren kept his rifle trained on the older man's center mass. "You came here to murder me in my home, to execute me like an animal. How's that working out for you?" Victor said nothing, his eyes moving to the garage where smoke still poured out, where his entire brigade lay dead. "Your niece called you," Darren continued. "Told you I was vulnerable. Told you to bring your men here tomorrow. Today. and kill me. She gave you my location, my schedule, my isolation. She thought she knew me. He stepped closer. She thought I was weak. The art gallery, Victor said, understanding dawning. All the money we've laundered through her business, you knew? I figured it out. Darren's voice was cold. 3 weeks ago, and I've been waiting for you ever since. Victor looked at him with something like respect. You were military, special forces, Delta Force, 12 years. Darren moved around the SUV, keeping his rifle steady. I kept it secret from her, from everyone. Thought my past was behind me. Turns out she married me specifically because of it. Thought I was vulnerable, isolated, easy to eliminate when the time came. She used you, Victor said. Used your marriage to embed herself, to build trust. Then when we needed to clean up our operations, remove anyone who might know too much, I became a target. Darren nodded. Except your intelligence was wrong. I'm not vulnerable. I'm not isolated. I'm exactly what I've always been. A weapon waiting for someone to make the mistake of pointing me at themselves. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. The FBI team Mark Wilkins had assembled, responding to Wesley's tip about a major Bratva incident. Perfect timing. What happens now? Victor asked. Now you go to prison, Darren said. You're surviving operations. And most importantly, Stella, because I recorded every phone call, documented every connection, and I'm going to make sure everyone involved pays for this. Victor's shoulders sagged. His empire, built over decades, was collapsing around him. His brigade was dead. His niece's scheme had failed catastrophically, and the man they tried to kill stood in front of him completely unharmed, having destroyed them with tactical precision. You should have left me alone, Darren said quietly. I was done with that life. I was just fixing cars and trying to have a normal existence. But you came to my home. You brought death to my doorstep. So I reminded you what happens when amateurs play soldier with actual soldiers. The FBI vehicles screamed up the access road, agents pouring out with weapons drawn. Darren set his rifle down carefully, raised his hands, and called out, Darren Jacobs. I'm the homeowner. I've just survived an attempted murder by organized crime. The threat is neutralized. Mark Wilkins emerged from one of the vehicles, a stocky man with sharp eyes and 20 years of organized crime experience. He assessed the scene, the bodies, the garage, Victor in custody, Darren standing calm and collected, and understood immediately what had happened. Holy hell, Wilkins said. How many? 23 hostile combatants, Darren replied. All here to execute me. All dead or in custody. I have documentation, recordings, and evidence of a conspiracy involving Russian organized crime and my wife. Wilkins looked at him with new understanding. Your wife set this up? Stella Jacobs, born Stella Riddle. Her uncle is Victor Riddle, the man you're currently detaining. I have recordings of their conversations, plans, everything you need for prosecution. The next 4 hours blurred into a choreographed chaos of law enforcement processing a crime scene. Wesley's cleanup crew arrived, private contractors who specialized in sensitive situations, and began coordinating with the FBI. Shane Valentine appeared, providing verification of Darren's background and his reason for having military-grade equipment. By 2 p.m., the scene was under control. Bodies were being removed, evidence was cataloged, and Darren sat in his kitchen giving a statement to Wilkins and 2 other federal agents. He walked them through everything. His discovery of Stella's connections, the surveillance, the phone recordings, the preparation, the attack. This is the most elaborate self-defense case I've ever seen, one agent said, shaking his head. You built a fortress specifically designed to kill multiple attackers. I built a secure garage 4 years ago, Darren corrected. I had no idea I'd married into the Bratva. But when I discovered the threat, I used the resources available to me. Everything I did was legal self-defense against an organized murder conspiracy. Wilkins studied him. Your former Delta Force. That's classified. Not anymore. Shane Valentine confirmed it. And honestly, it's the only thing that makes sense. 23 armed men, all dead or captured, and you don't have a scratch. Wilkins leaned back. You're a weapon, Mr. Jacobs. A very precise, very deadly weapon. I'm a car mechanic, Darren said. Who survived an attempted murder? You're both. Wilkins closed his notebook. But here's the good news. Everything you've done appears to be legal self-defense. You have recordings of conspiracy, proof of intent, and 24 armed men who broke into your property to kill you. No prosecutor in the country would charge you. And Victor Riddle is going to spend the rest of his life in federal prison once we connect him to 2 decades of organized crime. And my wife, we picked her up an hour ago. She's being charged as an accessory to attempted murder, conspiracy, and about 15 other felonies related to the art gallery's money laundering operation. Wilkins watched Darren's face. She didn't know you'd survived until we walked into Janet Stewart's apartment. The look on her face. I've been doing this job for 20 years, and I've never seen someone realize their entire plan had failed so spectacularly. Darren felt nothing. The pain would come later, he knew. The grief, the anger, the loss. But right now, there was only the satisfaction of survival, of victory against enemies who'd underestimated him completely. Can I see her? He asked. Wilkins considered it. Against protocol, but given the circumstances, yeah. She's being held downtown. We can arrange a visit tomorrow if you want. I want. By 6 p.m., the last of the law enforcement vehicles had departed. Darren stood in his garage, now empty except for the Mustang and the blood stains he'd spent weeks scrubbing out. The space smelled of death and cordite, a familiar scent from his Delta days, a reminder that violence was sometimes the only answer to violence. He called Wesley. I'm alive. Thank God. Wesley exhaled hard. I've been watching the news. They're calling it a major organized crime incident. 23 dead, 1 in custody, massive Bratva conspiracy uncovered. You made quite the statement, Dare. I made the only statement possible. And your wife? In custody. I'll see her tomorrow. Darren walked outside, breathed the cold air. Thank you for the support, Wes. I couldn't have done this without you. You saved yourself, brother. I just made a few calls. Wesley paused. What happens now? Now I rebuild, Darren said. I bury this marriage, I move forward, and I try to remember what normal life feels like. You sure that's possible? After today, Darren looked at his property, at the home he'd built, at the life he'd tried to create. No, but I'm going to try anyway. He hung up, walked back into the garage, and began the long process of cleaning. The bodies were gone, but the evidence of battle remained. Bullet holes, blood, the smell of death. He'd fix it, eventually. He'd restore this space the same way he restored cars, with patience and precision and care. But first, he needed to face Stella one more time, to look into her eyes and understand how someone could share 13 years with him, share a bed and meals and quiet moments, and then order his execution without hesitation. He needed that closure, that final understanding. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tonight, he'd survived. And sometimes, survival was victory enough. The Seattle FBI field office smelled of institutional coffee and fluorescent lights. Darren sat in an interview room the next morning, his hands folded on the metal table, waiting. Mark Wilkins had arranged this meeting despite reservations, understanding that Darren needed this conversation to close the chapter on his marriage. The door opened. Stella entered, handcuffed, flanked by 2 federal agents. She wore orange county jail scrubs instead of her usual designer clothes, her hair pulled back without the careful styling, her face bare of makeup. When she saw Darren, her expression cycled through shock, fear, and finally, something cold and calculating. The agents seated her across from him, stepped back to the walls. Wilkins stood in the corner, observing. They'd allowed this meeting on the condition he remained present. Hello, Stella, Darren said quietly. She stared at him, processing the fact that he was alive, unharmed, sitting across from her in complete control. Ow, she whispered. How did I survive 23 armed men sent to murder me? Darren leaned back. That's what you want to know? Not why I never told you the truth about my past. Not how I feel about my wife arranging my execution. Just, how did I survive? You're not a car mechanic. Her voice hardened. You never were. I am now. But before that, I was a Delta Force operator. 12 years, multiple deployments, more combat missions than I can count. He watched her face. I kept it secret because I wanted to leave that life behind. I thought being normal, being boring, being a mechanic would keep the violence at bay. Turns out I married the violence without knowing it. Stella's jaw tightened. Victor said you were vulnerable. He said you were isolated, easy to eliminate. He said he was wrong. Darren's voice stayed level, emotionless. I was never vulnerable. I built that garage specifically as a defensive position. I never fully trusted the world enough to let my guard down completely. And when I discovered what you were, what you'd done, I prepared. How long did you know? 3 weeks. I heard you on the phone speaking Russian to Victor. I ran the investigation, pulled your files, understood everything. The art gallery, the money laundering, your uncle's operations. You married me as part of a long-term operation, didn't you? To establish legitimacy, to build a cover, to have a civilian husband who'd never ask questions. Stella said nothing, which was answer enough. What was the plan? Darren asked. How is this supposed to work? Victor eliminates me. You play the grieving widow, collect my life insurance and whatever assets I had. And then what? Move to another city. Find another Mark? It wasn't like that, she said, but her voice lacked conviction. Then what was it like? He leaned forward. Explain it to me, Stella. Make me understand how someone shares 13 years with me, sleeps beside me, tells me she loves me, and then arranges for her uncle to send a death squad to murder me in my own garage. She looked away. You don't understand the world I come from. The Bratva isn't something you leave. It's family, blood, obligation. When Victor needed legitimate fronts for his operations, I provided them. When he needed people to trust, I created relationships. That's how it works. Did you ever love me? The question came out harder than he intended. Even once, even briefly, was any of it real? Stella met his eyes, and for a moment, he saw something genuine there. Regret, maybe, or the shadow of what might have been. At first, no. You were a target, a mark, someone convenient. Former military, stable, boring, perfect for what we needed. But over the years, she trailed off. Sometimes I forgot what I was doing. Sometimes it felt real, but not real enough to stop you from ordering my execution. Victor demanded it. Her voice rose. He said you were asking questions, that you become a liability. He said if I didn't cooperate, he'd have me killed too. I had no choice. Everyone has a choice. Darren stood, paced the small room. You could have warned me. You could have told me the truth. You could have asked for help. Instead, you picked up the phone and told your uncle to bring his brigade to my garage and execute me. I thought you were just a mechanic. Stella's composure cracked. I thought you were boring, safe, easy to handle. I never knew you were. She gestured at him. Someone who could kill 23 men without breaking a sweat. I'm exactly who I've always been, Darren said coldly. You just never bothered to really know me. You saw what you wanted to see. A mark, a target, a man you could use and discard. That was your mistake. Silence filled the room. Wilkins shifted against the wall, watching them both. What happens now? Stella asked finally. Now you go to prison, Darren replied. Victor's already cooperating, giving up everyone in his network to reduce his sentence. He's told the FBI about the art gallery, the money laundering, your role in recruiting me, everything. You're looking at 20 to 30 years minimum. Her face paled. Victor wouldn't. He already has. I've seen the transcripts. He's throwing everyone under the bus to save himself, including his own niece. That's the Bratva, isn't it? Family, blood, obligation, until it's inconvenient. Then it's every man for himself. Stella collapsed inward, the reality crushing her. Her empire, her marriage, her carefully constructed life, all of it destroyed in less than 24 hours. She'd gambled on eliminating a perceived weak point and instead triggered her own complete destruction. I want a divorce, Darren said. Obviously, my lawyer will file the paperwork. You won't contest it. She nodded numbly. And I want you to understand something. He leaned down, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. You thought you married a sheep, someone you could use, manipulate, and eventually dispose of. But you married a wolf who learned to wear sheep's clothing. And when you brought other wolves to my door, I reminded everyone what happens when you underestimate the wrong person. He straightened, walked to the door, paused. I tried to love you, Stella. I tried to build a life with you. If you'd ever been honest, if you'd ever told me the truth, maybe we could have found a way through it. But you chose to see me as weak, as disposable. That was your fatal error. Darren, she called as he opened the door. I'm sorry. He looked back at her. This woman he'd shared 13 years with, who betrayed him with cold calculation, who now sat in handcuffs facing decades in prison. He felt no pity, no lingering affection, just the empty space where love used to be. So am I, he said and walked out. The hallway outside felt colder, cleaner. Wilkins followed him out, pulled him aside. That was rough. You okay? I will be. Darren looked at the federal agent. What's the final count on charges against her? Conspiracy to commit murder, accessory to organized crime, money laundering, fraud. She's looking at 25 to 35 years minimum. Victor's cooperation is going to bury her along with everyone else in his network. Wilkins pulled out a folder. We also found evidence she's been skimming from Victor's operations. Turns out she wasn't as loyal to the Bratva as she claimed. Been building her own nest egg for years. Always looking for the angle, Darren said. Always. Wilkins handed him the folder. This is for you. Documentation of everything we've built against her, Victor, and the entire organization. Your testimony, the recordings, the physical evidence from your property. It's enough to dismantle the biggest Bratva operation on the West Coast. You did good work, Mr. Jacobs. I just survived. You did more than that. You gave us everything we need to put away people who've been operating with impunity for decades. Wilkins extended his hand. Thank you. Darren shook it, felt the weight of finality in the gesture. This chapter of his life was ending. The marriage, the secrets, the betrayal, all of it concluded in handcuffs and federal indictments. He walked out of the FBI building into Seattle's gray afternoon. Rain misted down, that perpetual northwest drizzle that made everything feel washed clean. His truck waited in the parking lot, and he sat behind the wheel for a long moment, processing everything that had happened in the past 48 hours. His phone rang. Oliver Tucker, his employee. Boss, I saw the news. Are you okay? Yeah, Ollie. I'm okay. The garage. Still standing. Needs some repairs, but it's operational. Take the rest of the week off, okay? I'll call you when we're ready to reopen. Sure, boss. And hey, I'm glad you're alive. You're a good guy. You didn't deserve any of this. Darren smiled despite everything. Thanks, Ollie. I'll see you next week. He hung up and started driving, not toward home, but aimlessly through Seattle streets. He passed the coffee shop where he'd met Stella 13 years ago, the park where they'd had picnics, the restaurant where he'd proposed. All those memories felt false now, tainted by the revelation of her true nature. How much of it had been real? How many moments had been genuine versus calculated manipulation? He'd never know, and maybe that was okay. Maybe the point wasn't to understand her psychology or motivations. Maybe the point was to accept that he'd survived, he'd won, and he had the freedom to rebuild whatever came next. By the time he returned home, it was dark. The garage stood silent, empty except for the Mustang. He'd have to repair the bullet holes, scrub the blood stains, maybe repaint the entire interior. But the structure was sound. He'd built it well, and it had served its purpose. He walked inside the house, poured a bourbon, and sat in the living room he'd never fully loved but had tolerated for Stella's sake. Tomorrow, he'd start fresh. He'd file for divorce, sell this property, maybe move somewhere new, start a different garage in a different city, build a different life. But tonight, he'd allow himself to feel the victory. 23 armed men had come to kill him, and he destroyed them completely. Victor Riddle was in custody, his empire collapsing. Stella was facing 30 years in prison, and Darren Jacobs, the man they'd all underestimated, sat in his living room drinking bourbon and planning his next move. He thought about Wesley Austin, Shane Valentine, Mark Wilkins, the men from his past and present who'd supported him when it mattered. He thought about Oliver Tucker, a young mechanic who looked up to him. He thought about the life he'd wanted, the peace he'd sought, and the reality that peace sometimes required violence to protect. His phone buzzed. A text from Shane saw the news. Drink some time. Definitely, Darren typed back. I owe you. You owe me nothing. You gave those bastards exactly what they deserved. Proud of you, brother. Darren smiled, set down the phone, and raised his glass to the empty room. To survival, to victory, to the hard truth that sometimes the sheep reveals himself to be the wolf, and the hunters become the hunted. The next morning brought clarity. Darren contacted a divorce lawyer, filed the paperwork, and began the legal process of dissolving his marriage. He contacted a real estate agent about selling the property. He called contractors to repair the garage. And he started planning his next chapter, maybe Montana, maybe Colorado, somewhere remote where he could work on cars and live quietly without looking over his shoulder. A week later, Mark Wilkins called with an update. Victor's testimony has given us everything. We've indicted 37 people connected to his organization, seized assets worth over $200 million, and dismantled the largest Bratva operation on the West Coast. Your wife's cooperation has been minimal. She's still trying to protect herself, but we have enough without her. Good, Darren said. There's something else. Victor's lawyer tried to negotiate a deal based on you using excessive force. They claimed you could have called the police, could have evacuated, could have handled it differently. The judge laughed them out of court. 23 armed men entering private property with intent to kill. There's no jury in America that wouldn't call that justified self-defense. Appreciate that. One more thing. Wilkins paused. Victor told his lawyer something interesting. He said you're the most dangerous man he ever encountered. Said he's been in the Bratva for 40 years, dealt with soldiers, killers, enforcers, and none of them compared to you. He said you turned his entire brigade into ghosts in less than 10 minutes. I had the advantage, Darren replied. I knew the terrain, I had preparation, I had training. They walked into my house expecting an easy kill. That was their mistake. Still, Wilkins sounded impressed. You're a hell of an operator, Mr. Jacobs. If you ever want to consult for law enforcement. No thanks. I'm done with that life. Fair enough. Take care of yourself. Darren hung up and returned to work. The garage had been cleaned, repaired, and restored. He'd sold the Mustang, too many bad memories, and started a new project, a 1970 Dodge Charger that needed complete restoration. The work was meditative, therapeutic, a way to process everything that had happened. Oliver Tucker returned to work, asked no questions about the news reports or the FBI presence, just helped with the Charger and told stories about his girlfriend and weekend plans. Normal life, the kind Darren had wanted all along. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized. Stella received nothing. A prenuptial agreement Darren had insisted on before marriage protected his assets, and her criminal convictions voided any claim to shared property. The house sold quickly, and Darren used the proceeds to buy 10 acres outside Missoula, Montana. Remote, isolated, beautiful in its harsh way. He built a new garage, this time with less paranoia, but the same craftsmanship. He hired local help, including a kid named Benjamin Marks who reminded him of a younger version of himself. Quiet, skilled, haunted by something he wouldn't discuss. Darren didn't push. Everyone had secrets. Shane Valentine visited twice, brought bourbon, told stories about their Delta days that made them both laugh and grimace. Wesley Austin called monthly, checking in, providing updates about the cases stemming from that day in Seattle. Victor Riddle had been sentenced to life without parole. Stella received 32 years, will be 70 years old if she ever got out. She tried to send you a letter, Wesley mentioned during one call. Prison staff intercepted it. Want to know what it said? No, Darren replied. I don't. Fair enough. Wesley laughed. How's Montana? Quiet. Cold. Exactly what I needed. A year after the incident, Darren stood in his new garage, working on a classic Ford truck, when Benjamin asked, Boss, can I ask you something personal? Depend on the question. The news stories from Seattle. That was you, wasn't it? The guy who survived the Bratva hit. Darren set down his wrench, looked at the kid. What makes you think that? I did time in the Marines, deployed to Afghanistan. I recognize the way you move, the way you assess rooms, the way you never fully relax. You're always watching, always ready. Benjamin hesitated. And you rebuilt this garage with specifications that go way beyond what a normal mechanic would need. Smart kid. Observant. Yeah, Darren admitted. That was me. 23 men. Benjamin whistled. That's impressive. It's not impressive. It's survival. They came to kill me, and I responded with superior training and preparation. There's nothing glorious about it. But you won. I survived, Darren corrected. There's a difference. Winning implies there was a prize. I just kept breathing while everyone who wanted me dead stopped breathing. That's not victory. It's just the price of underestimating the wrong person. Benjamin nodded, understanding. My sergeant in Afghanistan used to say something similar. The best outcome in war is the one where you go home. You went home. Eventually, Darren picked up his wrench, returned to work. And now I'm here, trying to build something better than what I left behind. You doing okay with that? It was a genuine question, the kind that deserved an honest answer. Darren thought about the nightmares, the moments when he woke up reaching for weapons that weren't there, the way he still checked every entrance to his property. He thought about the empty space where his marriage used to be, the phantom ache of betrayal that hadn't fully healed. I'm getting there, he said finally. Some days are better than others. But I'm alive, I'm free, and I'm doing work I enjoy. That's enough. Benjamin smiled. Yeah, that's enough. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the sound of tools and engines filling the Montana air. Outside, snow fell gently, covering the landscape in white. Darren's phone buzzed. A message from Oliver Tucker back in Seattle, asking how he was doing, sending photos of the shop's latest project. Life continued. Not the life he'd planned. Not the life he'd imagined when he married Stella 13 years ago. But a good life nonetheless, built on truth instead of lies, on genuine connections instead of calculated manipulation. And if sometimes he still checked the locks twice, still maintained his skills at the range, still kept emergency plans and exit strategies, well, that was just prudent. He learned the hard way that the world could turn violent without warning, that people could wear masks for years before revealing their true faces. But he'd also learned that survival was its own reward, that victory didn't require glory, and that sometimes the best revenge was simply living well while your enemies rotted in prison. Darren Jacobs, former Delta Force operator, survivor, car mechanic, stood in his Montana garage and smiled. The wolf had learned to be a sheep. Then the sheep had remembered he was a wolf. And now, finally, he was just a man trying to live his life in peace. That was enough. That was everything. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.